Joining us now in studio to discuss this is the Minister of Home Affairs, Malusi Gigaba. Minister, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you and good morning to you, Leanne, and our viewers at home.
All right. Minister, government, of course, being very, very vocal about saying that refugee shelters are only a temporary measure. What is going to be implemented in the long term?
You know, the first and most important thing, Leanne, is to express the regret of the South African government and I think of the majority of our people in South Africa for the criminal activities and violence directed at foreign nationals in our country. It doesn't represent who we are, and certainly, as the President said, it doesn't represent our value system as a nation. Secondly, we need to acknowledge the positive role played by immigrants in the South African society, particularly our economy. As workers, providers of critical skills, investors, most of the immigrants in our country are documented, and because of their activities, they pay tax. And so the allegation that foreign nationals in South Africa don't pay tax is as preposterous as an assumption that all South Africans do pay tax. We need to distinguish between those who don't pay tax and those who do, and acknowledge that the majority of undocumented, of migrants, of immigrants in South Africa are documented and do pay tax. But the spate of violence that we have experienced has actually, thrown a lot of myths of fallacies into the whole picture, and in actual fact has endangered not only immigrants in South Africa, both documented and undocumented, it has also increased risks for South Africans abroad. Now, what we are trying to do is to prioritize the stabilization of the situation so that those people who have been placed in temporary shelters can be reintegrated back into the communities from which they come, from which they were violently uprooted. We are focusing on investigating the root causes of this so that we can arrest all the perpetrators, interrogate them so that we know who is behind this, because from where we stand as government, we don't think that this is just sporadic outbreak of violence. It is orchestrated, it's organized, somebody is fueling this, and the purposes seem to stretch beyond just an anti-African immigrants sentiments in South Africa. The purposes seem also to be very political, to destabilize the country.
Okay. Minister, let's have a look at a couple of issues that a lot of people are very, very concerned about. And I know that you mentioned a lot of the immigrants, the foreign nationals living here in South Africa are registered, they are paying tax. However, I think that there's a perception out there, and a lot of foreign nationals even admitted themselves that they have been waiting for years to try and officialize their residency here in South Africa, to try and get their documents, to try and get through the Home Affairs Department and to try and become citizens. But they can't do it because of the backlog, and there is a huge backlog. And there's been a lot of comments that we need to get our immigration measures beefed up. And this is a very key problem to what's happening here. Hence, they are illegal and working illegally in the country. What are we doing to rectify the situation?
Look, we need to distinguish between people who qualify for visas and documents and those who don't, but would one way or the other try to take their chances. For example, South Africa receives the highest volume of asylum seekers, but most of those asylum seekers are actually economic migrants. They are not asylum seekers. They come from countries which have absolutely no violence, where there are no threats or risks, and therefore to grant them asylum in South Africa damages our relations with those countries, because when we have granted somebody asylum, it's the same thing that happened to a South African who went to Canada to apply for asylum because he claimed to have been threatened somewhere. Our response was that there's no violence in the country. He had not exhausted the legal mechanisms in South Africa. So we don't have this huge challenge of backlogs in the department. There might be a few, but with regards to people who are applying for refugee status, they are given interim permits which allow them to live in the country whilst their applications are being processed. Those who are applying for permanent residency, their applications have been expedited over the last a few months. we've actually expedited the resolution of backlogs and called on those using even the social networks. If you look at my Twitter handle, it deals with people who apply for all manner of documents. It actually has become almost a contact center in itself. Yeah. Even on Instagram and other social networks, our Facebook page focuses on this. So we are addressing all of those challenges. We do not have a huge problem of backlogs in the country. I think that what we need to do, one is to overhaul our immigration policy framework, which is what we are currently undertaking. Secondly, we need to introduce a new paradigm of management of international migration, relying not only on the Department of Home Affairs, but also on partnerships with other departments, with other tiers of government, with the community, as well as with our neighbors on the continent. Because the biggest challenge really for South Africa is how do we manage economic migration, which has become our most urgent challenge, and which could be used by these opportunists to fuel violence against foreign nationals, creating a false sense that most of the immigrants in South Africa, particularly African immigrants, are undocumented. Fact of the matter is that the overwhelming majority of immigrants in South Africa are documented and are playing a positive role in terms of the economy, of social development, of national security and social cohesion.
Minister, how do you keep track of the foreign nationals living here? Because it is a very well-known fact that our borders are exceptionally porous. I mean, we've got foreign nationals coming across our borders on a daily basis, and it's increasing every single day. I mean, you speak to some foreign nationals, they get deported, they get caught, and they come across the border again in the same day. It doesn't seem that there's enough protection on our borders. And that how do you keep a track on who is illegal and who is legal?
We actually do. The numbers of people who come into the country without documents do get apprehended, sent to Lindela, deported, and if they do come back, we will continue doing the same thing. So we spend a lot of money implementing the deportations program. But as I say, the challenges for us are to improve our border management. And Indeed. The introduction of the Border Management Agency is going to assist us a great deal, even though it will not solve the problem altogether. Yeah. It will assist us a great deal towards this. The President has deployed 350 soldiers to work as immigration officers and assist us in the management of our borders. And the Border Coordinating Committee has now been transferred to Home Affairs with its capacity so that we are able to implement measures to improve border management whilst we are working towards the establishment of the Border Management Agency, which will oversee the management of our land, sea and air borders. But at the same time, our ports of entry are indicating that millions of Africans enter this country with documents and therefore are legal in our country. The problem with this outbreak of violence is that it's targeted solely on African immigrants. It paints a picture of every African immigrant in our country as a criminal, as somebody who doesn't pay tax, who is a drain on the South African economy. It ruins our reputation with the African continent. What we are beginning to hear are rumors of retaliatory activities in some of our neighboring countries against South Africans that are in those countries. And that is what these criminal fools are not thinking about. We've got South Africans who are working on the African continent, who are investors on the African continent. We are putting them at risk by these stupid activities that we are undertaking. And that's why it's so important that the government must put an end, no matter what it takes, to this violence, so that we can stabilize our country and restore the relations of our country with the African continent, because we are integral to this continent. Some of the people who yesterday in the debate in the House seemed to be condoning the violence need to be called to order, because there is no excuse for the violence we have seen against any human being, let alone African immigrants in our country.
Yeah. Minister, unfortunately we have to leave it there for this morning, but thank you very, very much for joining us here on the program. Passionate words from our Minister of Home Affairs, Malusi Gigaba, about the xenophobia situation here in South Africa. Let's take a break. We'll see you after this.